This is the digital DJ tips review of these, the Hedd Type 07 A-Core speaker. They are a powered monitor that is perfect for DJ practice studios, production studios, generally at home, medium-sized rooms, I would say. They're gonna fit nicely in that kind of environment. They are a well-made, good-looking, slightly larger than normal for this type of speaker, front-ported, two-way powered monitor speaker with the kind of ribbon tweeter at the top here that's quite fashionable nowadays, and it sounds nice when it's handled properly anyway, and gives you the advantage of a nice wide dispersion, so you get a more forgiving kind of sweet spot for your audio. All right, so I'm going to talk you around the speaker, and then I'm going to tell you what's different about this speaker, and really it's about what it hasn't got, not what it has got, which might just appeal to you. So the second part of this video, we'll be talking about that. First though, let's have a look around the unit. So I've already kind of introduced you to the front of it. It's an MDF, very solid cabinet. They're quite heavy. However, it's got quite a soft, smooth finish to it, which is unusual for this kind of speaker, and rounded corners as well. Front ported, it's got a button at the front here, which lets you mute the speaker and put it into active mode, so you can have it standing by waiting for audio. There's also a red LED there that tells you when you're pushing it too hard. The 7-inch driver and the aforementioned ribbon tweeter. So we're going to look around the back of the other one that I've got set up here, because that's where the camera is, to look at what's on the back of the speaker. So back here we have simplicity itself. There is in the middle there a nice big metal volume control that goes up or down by 6 decibels, so it's not like a 0 to full volume or anything like that. You're meant to be handling this on your mixer or on your DJ controller. And then we have here and here treble and bass. Again, this is just for tweaking the treble and bass. You have an input here. I've got a TRS balanced input plugged in there, but you could plug in an XLR. It's one of those combi jacks. And also here we have a RCA unbalanced and a switch to go between the two. It's got an on-off and a power socket, and that's it around the back. Refreshingly simple, I'm sure you'll agree. And that's it. You buy them individually. They're about £600, UK pounds each, and you power them individually. They've got very powerful Class D amplifiers in them and all that stuff, but they are an analog speaker. And that's what's different about these. Now, this company also make a version with a digital signal processor in, which is what we've seen so often. Most of the speakers that we've reviewed at this kind of end of the market have got digital signal processors in them. They convert whatever you plug in to digital, and then they apply all kinds of clever stuff to correct the room and the timing and all that kind of thing, give you speaker emulations and stuff. And they invariably work with apps and software and correction microphones and all that kind of thing, which is all good. It's designed to make your room sound better. However, not everyone wants that. And so this company here, quite uniquely, I think, or certainly uniquely among the speakers we have reviewed, gives you an option. They've got this one, they've got the smaller 5-inch version, and they're both available as this setup is here, with completely analog circuitry in them, or with all the digital signal processor stuff that most brands are including and building in nowadays. Okay, so firstly, let's talk about what these sound like, because I've had these in the studio for a little while now. Our studio is a wonderfully dead sounding room. It's not got an awful lot wrong with it, so speakers tend to sound good in here. And I've got them on stands, pointing them directly at my head in this kind of equidistant, perfect setup. So these should sound good in a setup like this, in a room like this, and they do. They sound immediately engaging when you turn them on. The bass goes really nice and low, even though they're not backed against a wall, even though they are suspended effectively in midair pointing at me. The bass is really nice and tummy rumblingly low, and they have got an engaging quality to them that makes you just want to keep playing music nice and loud through them. They're revealing without being fatiguing. They're very, very nice. I've enjoyed playing with these. I've enjoyed auditioning them here. Now, I'm not using analog gear on these. I'm using a DJ controller with a nice sound card in it to audition them. But you could be using analog gear. It's one of the reasons why having analog speakers like this might be a good idea, because if you're using old-fashioned turntables and vinyl, maybe an analog mixer like this one here, then maybe you don't want speakers that will then convert everything to digital, do something to it and convert it back to analog before you hear it, right? So it's one of the reasons why people go for setups like this. However, look, these are from a good company. They are high quality components. They're well built. They sound really, really nice in the right environment. So now let's talk about a little bit more in depth why you might want to have analog speakers like these rather than going for modern speakers with all that digital goodness that just honestly generally makes everything sound better. Why would you? There's actually lots of reasons. So I will run through them. We've already looked at the first one. You could be using analog gear, right? You could be an old school DJ playing your old vinyl through an analog mixer. It makes sense to have speakers which can then just take that signal, make it louder and play it to you, right? That's what you're looking for. They've got zero latency. This is a big one. If you want speakers where what you do on your DJ gear comes out of the speaker instantly. So we always say, like, if you're playing a guitar, would you like the guitar to strum the second you play it? Or would you like there to be a little gap between you doing something and hearing it? Well, of course you would like it to be instant. That helps you to get your timing right. It helps you to feel connected to the instrument and so on. But with a lot of speakers nowadays, there is latency. Now, most people would never notice it, but some people do. Scratch DJs, performance DJs. And when you get down to rubbish speakers, like speakers that aren't made for DJing, you really do notice it, Bluetooth and all that stuff, but we're not going there today. However, these have got zero latency. They're an analog speaker. Digital signal processors always introduce latency. And even if you're not using analog gear, like the stuff I've got behind me, in fact, definitely if you're not using it, your software, your laptop, your DJ gear also introduces latency. It all adds up. So if you want to just make sure your speakers aren't adding to the issue of you not hearing stuff the second it comes, leaves your fingers for argument's sake, then this could be something to go with. Here's another example, something that as you get older, I think you just start to put more pay to this kind of stuff. My Technics turntables have lasted me since 1996. That's 30 years. I fully expect them to last for another 30 years. If you bought a speaker which came with an app, an iPhone app or an Android app, and it came with some software that ran on Windows 11 or whatever, and you needed to set all this stuff up and plug it in and get firmware for them to make them work and so on, do you honestly think that speaker would still be working in 30 years' time without any issues? Or do you think computers will be different, firmware will be different, no one's bothered to update it, the company's gone bust, they've moved on to another system, etc., etc., etc. I'm sure if you've bought DJ gear and you found it suddenly doesn't work anymore with the software that came with it because, hey, it's 7 or 8 years old, you kind of know what I'm talking about. You won't have that issue with speakers like this. They're an appliance. You plug them in, they do the thing. And unless they physically break, there's very little chance of them needing anything other than servicing in the next decade or two, right? So for reliability and for longevity, you can rely on analog gear in a way you can't rely on gear that requires apps and computers and firmware and software updates and all that kind of stuff. So there's another thing to think about there. Speakers like this, any analog speaker, has kind of got nowhere to hide. This is the next thing I want to talk about. If these had problems, if they were badly made, if there were bad issues with the frequency response they give you, if the components were poor, if they just had problems, they were a badly designed speaker made with poor components, then you would hear it because they're just a speaker with an amplifier in it that just plays what you plug into it. There's nothing there hiding any of that. So a lot of modern speakers, especially when we get down to the kind of rubbishy speakers that you buy for 80 quid from your local electrical store to listen to your iPhone through, right? The kind of speakers you charge up and chuck in a bag when you go to the beach. They only sound acceptable because they have modern, fantastic digital signal processors in them. Now that means that they can squeeze more out of those speakers than you would ever think possible. And when it comes up to speakers like this, the same is also true. If you build an average speaker with average components that looks like one of these and you stick a digital signal processor in it and you tune it properly, that speaker can sound better than it has any right to. But what you're doing there is, to quote a completely vulgar British term, polishing a turd. And so a speaker like this has to be good in the first place. So these Hedd speakers, what's nice about these is they make a version with a digital signal processor in as well, which gives you advantages, gives you things you can do that you can't do with these. But in order to do that confidently, you have to be sure that when people put both of your speakers together, the DSP one and the non-DSP one sounds good. Now, I've not auditioned the DSP one, but I can tell you the non-DSP DSP one sounds good. So the components, the build quality, the tuning, everything about these speakers is spot on, which gives you a nice warm feeling when you're spending £600 each on them, right? So there's nowhere to hide with speakers like this. Now also, I think the bigger picture is important. I touched on it earlier. We're in a room here that is designed for audio. This room is, to all intents and purposes, as close to perfection as I care about. It sounds really nice. There's very little reverb, there's very little echo, there's very few problems. Most of it has been damped and sorted out. And so therefore I can put pretty much any speaker in here, and the speakers are also positioned nicely, and it'll sound all right, like I said earlier on. Now, if that wasn't the case, and if you were trying to make a pair of speakers like this sound good in your room, you would have to do all those things first. Now, arguably, getting your room right and getting your speaker positioning right is more important than having a DSP in your speakers correcting the room, because they can't work miracles. DSPs can correct timing issues, they can correct positioning issues, they can correct frequency issues to an extent, but they can't make stuff sound brilliant in bad rooms, however good they are. And so if you are really serious about your DJ production studio, then this is kind of going to force you to get that bit right. And so there's nowhere to hide. I think the bigger picture is important. And if you're dedicated to the idea of getting everything right, speaker positioning, deadening the room and all that stuff, as well as anything else, then these speakers are going to definitely show you up if you get that wrong and give you the impetus to fix stuff in your listening room. So another thing is value for money. These are cheaper than the ones with a DSP in. So I always was once told by a sommelier that if you buy a cheap bottle of wine, you're paying for the branding and the labour that's gone into it, and the bottle and the label that they've stuck on it, and the markup of the wholesaler and the markup of the people you bought it from, the shop or the restaurant. What you're not paying for is the wine, because there's no money left to pay for the wine, so it's going to be rubbish. If you buy a speaker and you've only got a certain budget, if you are paying for stuff that is not 100% necessary in a speaker, like you're paying the development of the software and the firmware and the apps and the updates and covering all the costs of that stuff going forward as you pay it as you buy the speaker at the beginning, then you're paying less on the cabinet construction and on the components and so on. Or you're paying for that, but then you're paying a premium on top for other stuff. These speakers are cheaper than the versions that come with the DSPs in. So you're getting, as you spend your money, what you're getting is all speaker, right? And so if you want to make sure that you're getting value for your cash, and you want to be spending money on just the amplifiers, the speakers and the cabinets, hey, an analog speaker is always going to be better value for money. And finally, even if you think, you know what, I don't want to go down this all analog route. It's kind of how stuff was done when my dad was buying hi-fi gear all those years ago. I want the modern stuff. I want digital. I want DSPs. I want room correction. I want to be able to bung up my bass ports in order to reduce the bass and then retune the speaker so that it still sounds good. I want to do all that stuff I hear people doing. I want to be able to emulate other speakers so I can make my wonderful speakers sound like an iPhone and a Bluetooth speaker and smaller speakers and so on, which is all stuff you can do with DSPs and software. I want to do all that stuff. But I don't want that situation you mentioned earlier, Phil, where I buy a speaker that sounds great and something happens to the company or the software or whatever, or I look at other software that can correct speakers and think that looks better than the stuff they've built. The thing is, with speakers that have got everything built into them, and that includes the amplifier, by the way. Some people prefer speakers with a separate amplifier for the reasons I'm about to touch on. These, of course, have got an amplifier built in. But if you want to buy speakers that have got the digital goodness, but it's not in the speaker, in other words, you get to choose, then you need a separate DSP system. Now, they do exist. We reviewed one recently from a totally different company. Just an example, this is the Arc Studio from IK Multimedia. You plug your DJ gear into this. So from the back of your DJ gear, you take your output, you plug it into this box here, and then you plug the output from this box into the back of your speakers. And then you plug this box into your computer. And this is the box that has the software. This is the box that does all the stuff I talked about that digital signal processors, DSPs, do. So should you not like this, or should this company go bump, or should you want to change for a different version, or should you just want to turn it off and switch back to playing analog? All of those options are available to you if you use a different room correction system to the actual speakers themselves. So for some people, just separating all these bits makes a lot of sense. Another reason to go for analog speakers. We haven't covered this topic before, which is why I wanted to use the review of these speakers, which was going to be short because, hey, I've told you about them, I've told you what they sound like, there's not an awful lot left on them. I wanted to use that review to give you that comparison between analog and digital and let you make an informed decision about it. Ultimately, a speaker with a DSP in will do more, and it might be right for you if you don't mind a little bit of latency, if you don't mind worrying that in the future they might not work, if you don't mind, there might be more to go wrong, and all the things we just talked about, the kind of the opposite of all the things we just talked about, which a lot of people are fine with, then hey, go for it. They even make one. But if you want to keep it simple for any of the reasons we've talked about, these are right up there. They sound wonderful. £1,200 for a pair, so it's a decent investment. It's not going to be your first set of speakers, but it could well be your second. And for mid-sized rooms, for near-field monitoring, I think they're absolutely lovely. I've enjoyed them more than any speaker I've reviewed for a while, and I can't really tell you why, so it could be complete. I'm just enjoying having some analog speakers in the studio. I don't know, but I have enjoyed playing with these. They are the Hedd. I need to get this right because it's a long name. The Hedd Type 07. I'm going to need to look at the back again. A-Core, that's what they're called, not the Type A-Core 07. No, I got it right, but I did need to check. Addled old mind. And I've enjoyed reviewing them. So if you want to know more about these, we've written this up into a full review over on digitaldjtips.com, where you can find the specs and the prices and all of that in your currency. But let us know, do you prefer analog to digital? Do you think that this is kind of like, well, we've moved past this, what's the point? Do you think that it's crazy to expect speakers like this to sound as good as today's speakers? Or what's your view on this? And what are your favourite monitors? What are your favourite speakers in your studio? Do let us know your thoughts underneath. But meanwhile, this is Phil in the studio saying, get good, get out there, make the moments, and I'll see you again very soon. Until next time, bye for now.